Hi everyone. I am here today with Tilmann Stolte, one of beVisioneers Advisory Council members, and we are really thrilled to have him today and to be speaking with us, spending some time to talk about why he's part of beVisioneers and perhaps some other things that he's working on. So, Tilmann, thank you for joining us today. Can you please start by telling us a little bit about who you are and what drives you to your commitment to the planet?
Yes, awesome. And thank you for the invitation. It's really lovely to be here. Very excited to talk about all of that. Yes, who am I? I'm the CEO of Future Leaders Global. So we're a leadership community that wants to build a thriving world based on responsible action. So it very much ties into what beVisioneers is also trying to do. And I think we're going to get into that a little bit later. So my commitment to the planet, or why I'm doing the work that I'm doing, is I want to build a thriving world. I think that we have a lot of different problem spaces right now with sustainability, political upheaval, basically inequality in the world between all kinds of different areas.
Mhm.
So the core question basically that I'm always looking at is, what is the future I want, and what is the future that I fear? And I have the feeling that right now, when I do that exercise, or when we do that also in our programs at Future Leaders, that the same thing comes up. We're basically right now on the trajectory to the future that we all fear, that we don't want to have, where people are not happy, where they're stressed, where they're burned out, where we don't know if we will have enough resources in the future to actually live a good life. And then the future that we all want is more based around community, being together, doing meaningful work, and living on a healthy planet. So all of
Mhm.
that is basically supporting my drive for the work that I'm doing. And I think like my personal curiosity comes from, I'm an innovation manager by training. So I studied innovation management. And with that, there is a natural inclination towards thinking about how can we make the future better with all of the things that are coming with it. And I think that all of the challenges that we're having right now, all of these problem spaces as climate crisis, etc., we can also see them as amazing innovation opportunities, and just try to understand and try to see how can we now build something that works better for all of us and that supports that future that we actually want to live in.
Thank you for that, Tilman. And it clearly from your positions in Mate to Grow and Future Leaders that you're passionate about learning and development. And I know you're recently talking about the future of business and the importance of self-development and regeneration and leadership, and particularly regeneration and leadership. I know you've got a really interesting thoughts on that, and I'd love for you to speak a little bit more about that if you could, please.
Yes. And again, it ties back into that idea of what is the future that we want. And I had that problem that 3 years ago, I was working with an organization called Singularity University. So we were looking at how do we use exponential technologies such as artificial intelligence, 3D printing, gene editing to solve different problems in the world. And I had the feeling that technologies were mainly used to just like have the next productivity gains, for example, right? And that we never really asked the systems question. And at that time, the whole sustainability field started to bubble up a little bit more than it did before. And I had to acknowledge that I actually didn't really understand what sustainability means and what the big problem spaces in sustainability actually are. And then I started diving into that. And sustainability, in essence, and the conversations that we're mainly having right now, is about how do we reduce carbon emissions? How do we have less waste in the world? So it's always less of something. But if
Mhm.
I'm very blunt about it, less shit is still shit, right? So how
Yeah.
can we actually rethink that whole system and say, how can we build positive contributions? And that's where
Mhm.
regeneration is coming in. So regeneration as a concept is going beyond sustainability and says, we don't only want to reduce things, we actually want to build something that is positive. So we want to build positive feedback loops. We can talk about then circular economy, or we can talk about donut economics, concept by Kate Raworth, so that we actually acknowledge the planetary boundaries that we're having right now, and that we then think about what are the business models that have positive feedback loops, that contribute, that not only reduce things, but that actually do something good in the world. And the leadership component in that is then, well, how do we get there? So who's driving that action? So basically us as people having an idea about a better future, and then going for that. And leadership is just being proactive about things. There's a big difference to being a manager, for example. And I get that question a lot of the times, that people say, well, but I'm not a leader. Like, I can't drive that change. I'm not relevant for that. And that's not true. We are all leaders if we decide that we want to take action. The other thing would be a manager, right? A manager has people responsibility, but that's more about navigating structures in an organization. But leadership is about what's the future that I want to see and how do I get there? And then we need to develop these capabilities. So how do I co-create with others? How do I become aware of the biases that I might be having as a white male from Germany living in Copenhagen, right? Like, how do I then have these tools to drive that change that I want to see together with other people? So it's a mindset question, and we develop that. So these two things, regeneration, what's the vision? Where do we want to go? As in building positive business models, feedback loops in society, including the environment, et cetera, et cetera. And then leadership as the tool to say, how do we get there? How do we now have the capabilities to drive that positive change?
I absolutely love that, because I think so many people, particularly young people, might deal with that imposter syndrome when the word leadership is kind of, they're confronted with that word, and making sure that those two words, manager and leader, are differentiated makes a massive difference. And I know that a lot of the people, all of these young people who've applied to the fellowship and who will be joining us very soon, they are extremely interested in regeneration and business models related to it. It's actually came up a lot in the focus groups that we conducted earlier this year when we were building the program. So we're thrilled to have you on board, Tilmann.
No, and it's awesome that you're having that conversation, and it's awesome that people also request that by now. I love that, because regeneration, I think, also only came up like 2-3 years ago. And now it's, I feel like, everywhere. So I love that trend. So it's great to hear that you also have that in the focus groups.
Yeah, for sure. And we clearly have the right people as well. So thank you. So what makes you optimistic then about the future of our planet and society?
I think it is mainly that I'm seeing so many people driving positive change. And so in my work with different organizations, but predominantly with future leaders, in Future Leaders, we work with young people that basically go through a volunteer-driven community program where they understand also, like, how do I become a leader? Like, what is the future that I want to create, and how do I get there? And the second part is working with organizations where we help them basically with the same question, just more with a business focus. Yeah. And in both areas, it is astonishing to see how much people care. And it always comes back to people also in the business space, right? But young people really standing up and saying, we want to now like co-create the future, and we're not okay with what happens right now in politics, in businesses overall, and we want to drive that change. And it's really beautiful to see that, just like this ownership and agency that people develop. And then in the second realm around the businesses, I think this year we have worked with so many organizations that started talking about like triple bottom line and implementing ESG and people focus into their organization. And 5 years ago, that wouldn't have been a conversation, right? So we're seeing, and also like many people are talking about regeneration and basically listening also to the people in their organizations and understanding the urgency. And again, like 5 years ago, that wasn't the case. So I'm just really happy that that is happening, and it gives me the hope that we're on the right track for the future, and that we can co-create together, and that we, drive that change that we want to see, so to say.
For sure. And I mean, for anyone who has climate anxiety and who perhaps aren't too optimistic, just looking at the applications for this fellowship, and I'm sure many other fellowships, are just the most inspiring like piece of content you could ever see. I mean, when we were going through them as an admissions team, it really lit a fire in your heart. And yeah, I mean, clearly the younger generation are proactive and optimistic about our future, and we're so excited to meet all of these fellows with these wonderful ideas.
And there's a super tricky point in that, right? People have climate anxiety, and I know that like in our programs, or also even in my group of friends, having these conversations around what happens if we don't manage to get on the right track, right? It can be inhibiting any action, right? Then we're just starting to freeze, and it's paralyzing for us. That was the word that I was looking for right now. So I think I'd like, what I love to do is reframe that into how can we how can we work towards that better future instead of becoming inactive. So I think the worst thing that we can happen with climate anxiety, for example, is having that to become so strong that we don't dare to do anything and that we just become depressed and not even try, right? So rather funnel that into, okay, now we gotta go for it, right? Like, this is what I want to see. Now let's find the people. Now let's try to get to that place that we want to see.
Yeah, for sure. And like, it's almost being our term that we use here at beVisioneers is planet positive, and it's like trying to combat that using your word, planet paralyzed. And so yeah, super important when driving change forward, and something that we really see shine through in all of these fellows that are soon to join us. I mean, they're just so optimistic and positive about the change that they believe that they can bring. It's great. Can't wait to meet them and for you to see their projects. So why have you committed your time and energy to supporting beVisioneers specifically and its mission?
Because I love the concept, in short. I think when we think about the future, there is something that we have not acknowledged basically throughout the last 200 years in the Industrial Revolution, and that is that we can't control the future. And especially now with the world becoming more complex, like fast changing, there's this term called VUCA world: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So that's the world that we're entering right now, or that we have been part of for a few years already. So based on the backlog of being in businesses and the way how like capitalism has shaped the values of our society, we always try to control the outcomes for the future, and we can't, because we can't predict the future. So what we can do is instead to co-create it and to try to develop new ideas and see, like, what does feel right in the right moment? How can we have a vision for something, and then instead of like trying to have a specific outcome, more say, well, if we want to live a green future, a climate positive or planet positive future, for example, how do we then navigate that? How do we work towards that? How do we ideate? How do we iterate constantly? Because we will not know what the right frame is at the end of the day, right? Yeah. So I think empowering young people and using that momentum, that agency, and then creating these projects, these like building up innovators with concrete projects, I think is super important, super valuable. And that's why I love being part of that initiative. It's like bringing people in with the right mindset and giving them the tools and the opportunity space to drive change.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And the mindset is so important. And also something that you've been mentioning, collaboration. That collaborative element is something that we need for solutions that are going to work all over the world. And there's a lot of learning exchange in our program. So yeah, we can't wait to also, as a team, learn from the fellows, but for the fellows to learn from each other. So speaking about fellows, what advice would you give to aspiring planet positive innovators?
I think I have 3 different points. The first one is work on the right problem. So again, if we're thinking about the future, how can we implement regenerative thinking, for example, right? And how can we make sure that in a complex world that is a huge system of different stakeholders and players in it and partners and countries, politicians, whatever you see in that we're nudging, that we're understanding the system in the first place. So there's a systems thinking component in it, and that we then use the right leverage points, so effective change points to drive the change that we want to see. And I see that, especially in the entrepreneurship space, there are many people that working on like amazing ideas, but they're not working on the right problem space, right? So really understanding, how does my project, how does what I'm working on actually tie into the bigger thinking, into the bigger system, and does it actually provide the value that I want to see in the long run? Does it support the vision that I have for the future? I think that is crucial. And again, regeneration playing a big part of that, and the mindset. The second point that I'm seeing is be bold and be strong in your narrative, because what we're trying to do is going against a lot of the, let's say, old system, right? A lot of organizations are not going to be very happy about young people trying to disrupt the systems and building up a new system economically or socially, but we need to do it because what's the alternative? Otherwise, we have all of these challenges with the climate crisis, et cetera, et cetera. So being bold in what we're trying to achieve and not being intimidated by other people maybe saying, oh, I don't like that. That is super, super important. So that self-confidence in spreading the word and building that narrative, I think is crucial. Oh,
Thank you
and
so
then,
much.
sorry, the third point, I only had two.
Please.
The
No,
third point,
please.
you already mentioned that, co-create. So
Yeah.
again, we don't know what we need. Like, we don't know what we don't know. So how can we basically reduce our biases and leverage leverage the wisdom of the crowd and co-create together across cultures, across professions, across organizations, and really ideate, get feedback from each other, take that feedback in, iterate the solutions. Yeah, I think that is going to be super important as well. So again, work on the right problems, be bold, and co-create.
Thank you so much, Tilman. They are super aligned with us as a team as well in terms of values. So thank you. Final question for you, Tilman, today. Where do you want to see the world in 2030? Big question.
Big question. Well, 2030 is not that far away anymore.
I
I feel
know,
like. So
crazy.
that's a bit of a crazy feeling. I think what I would like to see for 2030 is that we're all working in towards the right direction, like into the direction of a regenerative future. I feel at the moment there is still a lot of conversations. Period. There's too many conversations. There's not enough. There's not enough action, so to say, in politics, in businesses. Many people are saying that they want to do something, but it doesn't really transfer into specific projects, et cetera, et cetera. There is not enough challenge of underlying business models or underlying systems problems. And I would love for us to be able in 2030 to just be together as people and drive that change and have the actual important conversations, right? Going beyond the, oh, do we need to do something about the climate crisis or not? I think that is, for me, that is not a question anymore. We know we have to do something.
Yeah.
So instead of like stalling on that, how can we just get together and acknowledge, well, the situation that we're in right now kind of sucks because it challenges a lot of our comfort in our lives and it gives us an uncertainty for the future, not knowing what happens, kind of tying back to the climate anxiety that you mentioned before.
Yeah.
So now, how do we work together? How can we just acknowledge that and then say, now what? What are the solution spaces? What do we want to tackle? How do we want to live? And then do it. Walk the talk. I think I would love to be in that kind of place in 2030.
Yeah. I think the really important word, and you said it several times, what there is like do it. It's like talking great, but then do it, which, we are the Do School fellowship. So very much in our ethos. So thank you very much for that, Tilman.
And to just add on that, because like doing has to happen within the right problem space, right? So I also want to emphasize that it's not about just driving some action and just going out there and just doing something. It has to also fit the right problem space. Only then it's going to be effective. So even spending a bit more time on thinking about what is the problem space and does it make sense, like thinking about that whole thing and getting input before then driving the action is important. But once that is clear, then go all in and then also walk the talk.
Definitely. So important. Thank you for mentioning that, Tilman. Tilman, we are going to call it there. I know you've got a very busy schedule, so thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. And again, we are really thrilled and excited to have you on board. And it's our pilot year. We can't wait to see where this journey takes all of us. And yeah, just thank you for your time today, Tilman.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very much looking forward to being part of that journey.
Thank you.